It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that doesn't bring peace, but a hollow echo of something once alive. I had fallen asleep alone again, not because I wanted to, but because the other side of the bed had turned cold far too many nights in a row. And then, just before dawn, a small presence stirred the air. My son came into the room while I was sleeping alone. There was no sound, no words, just the rustle of tiny feet across the floor, and the innocent weight of him climbing up beside me. But in that moment, something inside me broke, and something else began to bloom. You see, that night wasn't just about sleep. It was about absence. It was about the invisible wall that had been growing between me and the man who once held my heart. It was about 1,000 questions that had no answers, and the sickening clarity that comes when someone starts to love you less in silence. That child didn't know what he walked into. He didn't know that while I lay there, eyes closed and breath steady, I was wrestling with the reality of loving someone who no longer chose me. He didn't see the messages hidden, the glances that didn't land on me anymore, the late nights that turned into early mornings with no explanation. But his little body curling beside mine felt like the universe handing me a thread of truth, something pure in the middle of all the lies I had been pretending not to see. Infidelity doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through forgotten kisses and the way your name disappears from someone's lips. I remember the first time I suspected, the gut feeling that hit me harder than any evidence ever could, the slow burn of trust unraveling, and still I stayed, not out of weakness, but because walking away from a life you built with love, with dreams, with your soul stitched into every corner, that takes more than strength. That takes a quiet kind of war, and that war, it rages in moments like this, when your child curls into your side, trusting that you are whole, not knowing how fractured you really are. He came into the room not just to sleep, but to unknowingly remind me of who I still was underneath the ache. I was still a mother, still a woman with fire left in her, still capable of standing tall, even when everything else around me had collapsed. There's something devastating about realizing that the person you loved more than anyone could choose someone else in secret. But there's something even more powerful about realizing you don't have to break because of it. When I woke up that morning and looked at the sunlight falling across his little face, I made a silent promise that no matter how alone I felt, I would never let that pain define me. The truth is, love doesn't always leave like a storm. Sometimes it dies in shadows, soft, unnoticed, until you're suddenly cold and don't remember when it started. But when he walked into that room, he unknowingly lit a match in the dark, not for his father, not for the man who should have held me closer when I was slipping, but for me, for the part of me that needed a reason to rise, to breathe, to believe again. The emotional weight of isolation and betrayal in a relationship is unlike any other kind of pain. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with violence or rage. Instead, it creeps in slowly, quietly, like water seeping through the cracks of a once solid foundation. At first, you try to rationalize it. You tell yourself that people change, that seasons shift, that maybe this is just a rough patch. But deep inside, you begin to feel it, the absence. Not just physical absence, but the emotional kind that feels like you're screaming underwater and no one hears you. You lay beside someone who used to reach for you in the night, who used to trace your skin like it was home, and now their back is turned, their breath steady and distant, as if they're already somewhere else entirely. The betrayal doesn't begin with someone else's name or a stranger's perfume. It begins when you start to feel invisible in your own home, when the conversations grow shorter, the eye contact becomes rarer, and the affection feels more like obligation than love. You catch them smiling at their phone more than they smile at you. You stop being the person they confide in and start becoming the person they avoid. You become painfully aware of how much of your heart still hopes, still reaches, still believes in the version of them you fell for, even when the present version is slipping through your fingers. There's a quiet desperation that comes with this kind of loneliness. The kind that makes you stay up at night, trying to figure out what you did wrong, what you missed, how you could fix something that keeps breaking in silence. You begin questioning your worth, your beauty, your presence. You wonder if maybe you became too familiar, too easy to take for granted. And every time you bring it up, every time you ask, what's going on, you're met with dismissals, with vague reassurances, or worse, defensiveness that turns the blame back on you. What's even harder is having to carry that pain without breaking in front of your child. You smile through the ache, you cook dinner with a lump in your throat, and you tuck them in at night while fighting the urge to scream into your pillow. You learn how to compartmentalize grief, how to wear your hurt like armor, because vulnerability no longer feels safe in your own home. You're not just dealing with a failing relationship, you're also protecting your child from the fallout of that quiet collapse. And in doing so, you place pieces of yourself on a shelf, hoping one day you'll have the strength to pick them back up. Betrayal isn't always about someone crossing a line. It's about someone stepping so far back from you that you no longer know where you stand. You remember how it used to feel when they touched you with purpose, when their eyes lit up at the sight of you. Now, even a casual brush of their hand feels foreign, reluctant, mechanical. It's like being haunted by a love that still lives in your memory, but has died in reality. And because it didn't end with a fight, because no door slammed shut, you're left wandering the ruins, wondering if maybe you're the only one still searching for what's already gone. The worst part is the shame. Not the kind imposed by others, but the kind you impose on yourself. The shame of staying, of enduring, of loving someone who stopped loving you out loud. You feel foolish for hoping, for giving chance after chance, for thinking that the silence might one day break and return to warmth. You stop talking to friends because you're tired of explaining things you barely understand yourself. You start to isolate not just because you feel alone, but because you've begun to internalize that loneliness, to wear it like skin. It becomes your new normal, and yet you keep functioning. That's the cruel irony. You still get up, go to work, wash dishes, fold clothes. Life doesn't pause for heartache. And in the middle of all that functioning, you bury the betrayal deeper inside you. You turn your emotional devastation into routine. You learn how to survive inside a relationship that no longer nourishes you. You become the ghost of your own love story, still standing where you both once stood, while they've long since drifted somewhere else, maybe into someone else's arms, maybe just into themselves. It's a specific, unbearable kind of grief to be alone while still together. To look at someone and realize they've already emotionally left you, and yet you still share a roof, a child, a life. That is the weight of emotional isolation and betrayal. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It's heavy in all the ways that silence can break you. He walked in without knocking, not because he was being impolite, but because he was still young enough to believe that his presence was always welcome, that his mother's room was a place of comfort, not conflict. He didn't know that, behind closed eyelids, I was pretending to sleep to avoid the heavy thoughts that weighed me down. The door creaked softly, and his small silhouette moved across the dim room like a gentle ghost. He climbed into the bed without a word, pressing his body close to mine, instinctively reaching for warmth. In that single motion, everything changed. It was like a mirror was held up to my life, showing me what was left, what remained when love had vanished elsewhere. This small, beautiful soul who hadn't yet learned to hide his love, who hadn't yet been taught to withhold warmth as a weapon. That moment was more than just a child seeking the comfort of a mother. It was a reckoning, a quiet one, yes, but it was seismic. The symbolism of it was not lost on me, even in my haze of exhaustion and heartbreak. I had spent months feeling invisible, unwanted, unloved. The space beside me in bed that once felt like the safest place in the world had grown cold and foreign. It had turned into a nightly reminder of what I was losing. And then, suddenly, here he was, occupying that same space not out of duty or habit, but out of genuine, unfiltered affection. He didn't tiptoe around me the way his father had started to. He didn't hesitate, didn't withdraw. His presence was full. He was all in, and that did something to me. It reminded me of how it used to feel when love was real, before it became conditional, strategic, and exhausting. There was a kind of innocence in him that cut through the fog, and I realized, lying there beside him, that I had grown too used to pretending not to notice the lies, pretending not to hear the late night whispers on the phone in the hallway, pretending that the long silences between us were normal. But a child doesn't pretend. He simply exists, honestly, and in doing so, he exposed how dishonest I had become with myself. I was trying to preserve a reality that no longer existed. I was trying to convince myself that if I stayed silent long enough, if I held the pieces together hard enough, maybe things would go back to the way they were. But his little body beside mine, warm and trusting, reminded me of a deeper truth. I was not alone, but I had been abandoned, not in action, but in presence. And that kind of abandonment is harder to name, harder to fight, because it hides behind routine and shared responsibilities. When he curled into me, I didn't just feel love. I felt exposed, seen. I felt that in his unknowing way, he had walked into the battlefield I had been bleeding on for months. Not with questions, not with judgment, just love. Just presence. And that act, so small, was more honest than anything his father had offered me in a long time. Because when someone truly sees your pain and still chooses to draw closer, to offer warmth instead of retreat, that is truth. And truth, when you've been living in denial, hurts, it shatters. That moment made me reflect deeply on the roles we play to keep our lives looking whole. I had played the supportive partner, the understanding wife, the endlessly forgiving woman, but there, beside my son, I remembered who I really was underneath all the roles. I was someone who still deserved love, real love, the kind that doesn't flinch, the kind that doesn't slowly disappear. And I realized, as his fingers tangled around mine in his sleep, that he hadn't just entered the room. I had been invited back into myself, not the version of me that was trying to save a broken bond, but the version of me who once believed in honesty, in connection, in being seen. It's ironic how a child, without saying a word, can show you the truth that adults try so hard to conceal. His presence that night was more than comfort. It was clarity. I didn't need another argument. I didn't need to beg for transparency. All I needed was that one pure moment to understand what I had been losing, and what I could never allow myself to lose again. The ability to feel safe, to feel wanted, to be chosen. And for the first time in a long time, I felt chosen, not by a man who used to adore me, but by a child who still did. The silent pain of infidelity is a kind of suffering that defies language. It lives in the spaces where words used to be. It's the ache of hearing the door close at 11:30 p.m. Again, the sound of footsteps that no longer pause by your side of the bed, the way a phone is flipped face down on the table even when there's no one else around. It doesn't scream, it festers. It doesn't strike you all at once. It drips slowly and relentlessly, like a faucet that never quite shuts off, eroding your peace day by day. What makes it so excruciating is not just the betrayal of trust, but the erosion of intimacy. You're not simply hurt by the thought that they gave someone else what you thought was yours. You're devastated by how easily they withheld it from you. The silence, is what kills you first. It begins subtly. Fewer questions about your day, shorter replies to your thoughts, a growing impatience in their tone, as if your existence is an inconvenience. The body might still be there, sleeping in the same bed, sitting across from you at dinner, but the spirit, the presence, is gone. You begin to grieve someone who is still alive, still breathing beside you, and yet has already left you emotionally. That grief is private, hidden. You can't scream about it without sounding paranoid. You can't cry too much without seeming dramatic. You can't accuse what you can't prove, so you swallow it, you carry it, quietly. It's in the moments no one else sees. When you sit in the bathroom long after the water's stopped running, just to buy yourself time to gather your expression. When you check their phone and immediately feel sickened with guilt, even though you know deep down something is wrong. When you ask them why they're distant and they act like you're imagining it. Gaslighting, not always overt, becomes a kind of norm. You start to question your own intuition, to convince yourself that maybe you're too emotional, too sensitive, too much, and in trying to protect your love, you betray yourself. You become complicit in your own erasure, agreeing to accept less because the idea of confrontation feels like stepping off a cliff into a life you're not ready to live. You replay everything, every look that lasted a little too long, every sudden text that made them smile, every night they said they were working late, but came home smelling different, more like silence and guilt than sweat or perfume. You notice how they no longer initiate affection, how they pull away from your touch, how even their apologies start sounding like rehearsals. It's like being in a movie you didn't audition for where the ending is inevitable, and you're the only one who doesn't have the script. And yet you stay, you make excuses for them. You tell yourself that maybe it's stress, maybe it's temporary, maybe you need to change. You twist yourself into softer shapes, hoping they'll come back. You overcompensate, become more loving, more forgiving, more available. But their absence only grows, mocking your efforts with cruel indifference. And then there's the shame, deep, corrosive shame that whispers, "How could you not see it coming? How could you allow yourself to be loved so little?" You feel embarrassed not just for being cheated on, but for loving so hard, so blindly. You start hiding it from your friends, because repeating the same stories about why they're distant, why things feel off, begins to feel pathetic. You become a master of performance, smiling at family gatherings, posting pictures with captions you no longer feel, pretending you're okay. But inside, you're suffocating. You cry in traffic, in grocery store parking lots, in the shower. You live a split life, outwardly composed, inwardly unraveling. And what no one tells you about infidelity is that it doesn't just break your heart. It shatters your sense of identity. You begin to wonder if you were ever really loved. If the version of them you fell for was real or just a performance. You wonder what they told the other person about you. You imagine the lies, the comparisons. You begin to carry their betrayal as if it were a reflection of your inadequacy. And that's the cruelest part. It's not just what they did. It's what you start doing to yourself in response. You lower your voice, you dull your joy, you stop dressing up, you stop dreaming, but even in the thick of that pain, you carry on. You pack lunches, you attend meetings, you listen to your child's stories and hold their hand while your heart quietly bleeds. Because as broken as you are, life doesn't pause. And that, perhaps, is the most agonizing aspect of the silent pain of infidelity. It demands that you endure, perform, and survive, all while the person who broke you acts as if nothing happened. Motherhood, identity, and resilience are intricately woven threads that hold a woman together when everything else is unraveling. When the foundation of a relationship begins to crack, when love starts to erode beneath the weight of lies and absence, it is often the role of a mother that keeps her anchored, even as her sense of self threatens to dissolve. In the middle of infidelity, emotional neglect, and betrayal, A woman doesn't just experience the pain of a broken heart. She feels the weight of continuing to function for her child. Because no matter how much she is hurting, there is breakfast to be made, school bags to be packed, stories to be listened to. The world doesn't stop just because her soul is breaking, and so she steps forward, one foot after the other, carrying the unbearable with quiet strength that no one sees. The irony of motherhood is that while it gives life a deeper purpose, it can also mask the woman behind the role. You become so consumed with keeping everything running, with protecting your child from the fallout of your emotional chaos, that you forget who you were before the heartbreak, before the suspicion, before the distance, before the nights you cried silently into your pillow while your child slept down the hall. You begin to function on autopilot, efficient, nurturing, present, but beneath the surface you are drifting. You stop recognizing the woman in the mirror. Her eyes look tired, her smile feels forced, her silence grows louder every day, and yet she shows up, every single time, because her child deserves safety, love, and consistency, even if the rest of her life is unraveling. Motherhood becomes both a shield and a burden. It gives you reason to rise, but it also demands that you suppress. It forces you to hide your pain behind gentle bedtime kisses and soft lullabies. You clean up toys with trembling hands. You help with homework while trying to suppress the urge to scream at the injustice of your own reality. You answer the innocent "Where's Daddy?" questions with a calm voice, even though your heart is thunderous with rage. You model peace while internally negotiating war. And still, somehow, you manage to love, fiercely, endlessly, because even when your partner fails to show up, you don't have the luxury of disappearing. But something happens over time. In the cracks of motherhood, resilience starts to take root. It doesn't begin with grand declarations or dramatic choices. It begins in the quiet decisions, the choice to get out of bed, to make dinner even when your appetite is gone, to smile when your child looks up at you with trust in their eyes. It grows slowly. It builds with every day you decide to be emotionally present for someone else while learning to reassemble yourself from the pieces your partner left scattered. That strength is raw. It's often unacknowledged. But it is the very thing that allows women to survive betrayals that should have broken them. The identity you begin to reclaim isn't just about being a mother. It's about remembering that you are still a woman, still worthy, still whole, even when someone tried to convince you that you were less. You begin to peel back the layers you've had to wear for survival. The "I'm fine" mask, the constant peacemaker, the forgiver of unforgivable things. And beneath all of it, there she is, the version of you that once laughed loudly, that danced without caution, that believed in love without fear. You start to reconnect with her, maybe not all at once, maybe not every day, but slowly, steadily, you begin to remember your own name. You realize that the resilience you show as a mother is not separate from the woman you are. It is an extension of her. That even in the midst of abandonment, of emotional starvation, you have not disappeared. You've adapted, you've endured, and that endurance is not weakness. It's survival. You've taught your child what it means to hold steady when life storms around you. You've shown them that love is not just a word whispered at night. It's an action, lived out in daily sacrifice and presence. And eventually, you begin to reclaim space for yourself. You find moments where your identity isn't just wrapped in giving, but in receiving. You give yourself permission to be angry, to grieve, to want more. You begin to see that staying quiet to keep the peace is no longer peace, it's suffocation. And from that realization, you draw new boundaries. You choose yourself, not just for your child, but for you. Because you are not just someone's mother. You are not just the background of someone else's choices. You are a woman who endured, who bent but did not break. And in that realization, your resilience becomes your revolution.